Thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to be here representing NOTUS with this terrific panel. I wanted to start out reading something. I thought Lev did a great job. I don't think I could improve on that, but I may, and I may overlap with it a little bit. China has surpassed the US as the global leader in critical technologies, controlling 57 of 64 key technology areas ranging from AI and biotech to advanced materials and EVs, compared with the US leading in only 7. While the US retains advantages in top-tier AI models, China excels in research, patent output, infrastructure, and rapid industrial implementation, putting the US at risk of losing the long-term technological race. And just to prove how ubiquitous AI is, AI wrote that. I wanted to ask you guys, where's the urgency? Where's the risk from your perspective? If I could kind of maybe kick it to you, Congressman Himes, and then ask you guys what you think.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, and thank you to the McCain Institute for this really important conversation. So the urgency, I think, is in 2 buckets. One is really familiar, which is we should beat our global antagonists to technologies that could change everything from a security standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. It's nice to imagine that a country imbued with values like ours would get to AI applications faster than countries that are not imbued with those values. And that's a familiar thing, right? Our grandparents, when Einstein told FDR that an atomic bomb might be possible, and we just went to town with the Manhattan Project and everything with the idea of beating the Nazis, and it's a parlor game to imagine what would have happened if the Nazis had come up with an atomic bomb before we did. And of course, in the 50s, the Sputnik moment, which maybe was only important symbolically, but Americans were terrified by that. That's pretty clear. But it's different in one respect, which is that these technologies change everything. Certainly AI does, right? AI changes everything. There's just not an industry, there's not a thing, including, by the way, using biosynthesis for good and ill, that isn't radically different in the context of AI. And that's true of quantum, where if somebody gets to a cryptographically relevant quantum computer before we do, goodbye JP Morgan, goodbye internet and email and everything that relies on encryption. So we understand that. The other thing that I would suggest that is maybe, it's bigger, I want to use the word political, but I think it's bigger than political. It's about the way Americans think about innovation and technology, which has always been a contentious thing, right? To those of us with fancy degrees from fancy places, innovation and change is a really amazing thing that makes our life better. But talk to the ex-steel worker in Michigan, or think about the way the tech bros poll in this country. So if AI comes out and it is regarded by the American population as generating, unconsented pornography and terrible propaganda and helping biosynthesis develop COVID ×10, as opposed to curing cancer and all the other amazing things that AI could do. That is a huge difference in my world, in the political world. And we can't afford to not have, Lev was just talking about the public financing, we cannot afford to have our government not continuing to fund the innovation that is really the enduring American advantage. And if AI is regarded by the American population as the thing that devastated my community economically and as a matter of values, we will lose out, because we're a democracy and lots of other places aren't. And so I think those 2 reasons are why we need to be focused on not damaging our innovative capacity right now.
You want to jump in, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's really important. You mentioned the capital side and what's happening on a kind of a global level. I speak to it from a space perspective because, this industry I serve. You're watching the international community actually dump a lot of money into the innovation right now, where we're debating what we want our strategy to be. And if you think about it, the Germans alone are going to put almost $1 trillion into space-based capabilities over the next 5 years. And they're thinking about how they're building it. But they're building out from a ground perspective. Like, they are taking everything that the innovation community can bring, applying advanced capabilities like AI, and they're going from a fresh start perspective. The Chinese are going to surpass the U.S. as a leader in space if we're not careful about how we invest in it. And that's something that probably 3 or 4 years ago we never even thought about. We didn't think about the Chinese could actually drive launch, drive capabilities, bring intelligence down to their communities in a way that was going to ever surpass the U.S. And yet here we are. We're at that point where we're launching. They're launching at a pace that is surpassing us. I think it is really important to have when we start talking about the investment in the capital perspective. Our industries were built based on the U.S. investing into these communities, and specifically industries like space, to make sure that we are always in the front. And now we're kind of in a debate of where the values are of the next generation thing, and we're kind of getting set behind now. Well, the rest of the international community is excelling and moving forward, and I think that that's something we have to take very seriously, how we really do think about how do we capitalize critical things like space. And if you actually look at the conflicts that are going on in the world, they're actually being run from space. And you look at what's going on in Ukraine, they changed warfighting because they had space-based capabilities to go to autonomous, to have autonomous fighting capabilities that, guess what? The U.S. is woefully behind. I heard somebody talk earlier today about why don't we go to small format autonomous capabilities because we're into the big business. Because we've been investing in big munitions for years. In commercial industry like ours, we've already solved the problem for small format drone capability for swarming. But guess what? We're not buying that. We're not investing that way. And I think that that's the way that we have to really think about how do we apply capital from the government to accelerate what the commercial industry can bring.
JC?
Yeah, and first, thanks again for the McCain Institute for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be here. So first, there's a few things that change. I believe we're living in the same time where the threat is almost as close to the Manhattan project time. There's the first time in history where we have to face 2 nuclear peer adversaries at the same time, and China has been rapidly building out capability in military fusion, which is where we come from. And there's a few things when you look at power generation and deterrence. When you look at power generation, the U.S. has been flatlined for about 25 years at about 4,000 terawatt hour of electricity that we can produce. China started about 1,000 terawatt hour. They're now at over 10,000 terawatt hour. That's a significant delta between where we are and where they are. And I think the way we beat China is not by trying to outpace them on production, but doing what America does best, which is innovation and finding the leap through technologies like fusion that have significant energy density. And what that means is for the 55,000 barrels of oil, the amount of energy you can get of 55,000 barrels of oil, you can get from 1,000 liter of water bottle that's on your table. And so that's the way that we could beat China with these advanced technologies. And right now, the investment, as Lev said and another pointed out, is significantly higher in China than in the United States. Well, you got to change that. We got to work on public-private partnerships and teaming up to essentially accelerate the development. And we have to make sure that the U.S. continues to maintain leadership in critical technologies like fusion and AI and others. And when you think about energy security, is also the baseload of national security. When you think about the Strait of Hormuz becoming a choke point, or when the Russia-Ukraine war broke, more than 50% of Germany's energy came from Russia. So having energy security as national security and having resilient and independent energy source is critical. And as much as technology race, it's also a values race, and we have no choice but to win.
Dan, you had mentioned, you were talking about Ukraine, we're talking about Ukraine, Iran. We're seeing cheap commercial drones taking out expensive munitions. What are, and satellites being used for targeting. What are we learning? I wanted to ask you and Congressman Himes, what are we learning from those conflicts about about the use of future technology?
I think one of the things that we've learned is the speed of adoption to new technologies in a conflict environment. If you look at how the war started, it is not how they're finding it today. Long guns versus cannons versus what we're doing from small base drones. But the reality is, it all started really with space-based technologies of being able to actually target and use very exquisite capabilities from the community to give them this opportunity to understand where their adversary was. But they had to adjust very quickly how they got to the Russians. And they were the first to actually apply drones. And the first drones that they were sending were failures, but they just kept iterating and iterating, bringing the best technologies from the West in to apply to them. And now, if you look at just how they've taken out behind the lines and deep into refineries, they're getting there based on small formats, not by flying planes in there. They're not using large munitions anymore. But it's the ability to actually apply it. Well, then the Russians turned around and what they do? They used electromagnetic capabilities to jam GPS. And they thought that was going to be the ending to it. Again, by bringing technology together, they rapidly used either a fiber optic cable, which became very inefficient, or now they're using basically 3D mapping of the world to actually apply it to the drones. So when they get jammed from a navigation perspective, they can actually get to a target within 2 meters by using satellite-based GPS. We've seen the exact same thing happening in the Iranian war. When I talk to our allies who we support, they are fighting this conflict based on new capabilities that we didn't have just 3 years ago. And I think that that's where we're seeing the rapid evolution of using all these different sensors now to apply the information to be able to be in this conflict. And by the way, these capabilities are in formats that are $3,500, $5,000. They're not $1 million munitions anymore. But they're doing them in swarms, hundreds at a time, which quite frankly are almost impossible to stop. And I think that that's what we've really seen, how we can actually effectively, how we have to think about how do we drive innovation to do it, because autonomy is becoming the new warfront. I'm just talking about drones. We're also talking about subs. We're talking about autonomous vehicles on the ground. That is actually cascading, by the way, into the way that we will be working on from a commercial and enterprise business perspective, because we take these capabilities we learn in warfare and we just apply them into the enterprise marketplace. And so I think we've learned a lot in just the last couple of years. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think what Dan is talking about is asymmetry. Mm-hmm. And we've been struggling with asymmetry for a generation now. When General Bacon was learning, when he was a young officer, the U.S. military was almost 100% dedicated to fighting the Soviets in the Fulda Gap in Germany, right? That's what we were going to do. And yeah, there was guerrilla actions and here and there, but that's what we were going to do. So it was just our tanks against their tanks. 9/11, of course, changed that. So post 9/11 asymmetry is the fact that a bunch of terrorists with airplanes can create some major effects. Now the volume has been turned up huge, right? Anybody who watched Operation Spiderweb, where the Ukrainians took out the most critical Russian nuclear assets with a box truck and a bunch of lawnmower engine-driven drones, you realize that everything is different, right? And you see this in the actual results, right? Over and over and over again out there, guys with almost nothing, the Ukrainians 4 years ago, the Taliban in Afghanistan, Iran right now, we sank their navy. We're really pretty good at that, but there is an even more from a strategic standpoint, who's winning here? The Russians aren't. We're not winning in Iran. We did sink their navy. We broke a lot of their missile launchers, but they've got a new, more hideous regime in place. And by the way, they've closed the Straits of Hormuz. So that asymmetry is reflecting itself in us winning tactically a lot and losing strategically over and over and over again. And so what really worries those of us in government is that the volume has been turned up in a huge way. Quick story. I'm with General Milley after he retired. This was probably 2 years ago, and we've each had a glass of wine or two. And he didn't need a couple glasses of wine to be very open about his opinions. And he just said, look, if it were up to me, and he was expressing frustration over the pace with which the Pentagon alters its culture and thinking to address this radical new asymmetry. The example of which, of course, is Spiderweb. And he said, if it were up to me, I would never build another F-35 again. I would not build another aircraft carrier. I'm from Connecticut. He says, maybe a submarine. But he's exactly right? I mean, somebody tell me, I'm not on House Armed Services, but somebody tell me that we're not 3 years away from tiny little autonomous drones, each of which has a half-pound shaped charge, and you can put 20,000 of these things on a carrier. If you ever been on a carrier, there's a lot of places where a small drone can penetrate straight into the magazine to land on a 2,000-pound bomb. So, our Pentagon needs to be grappling with that reality. And sadly, though they are fabulous people, the culture, the promotion incentives, driven, frankly, by the United States Congress, Dr. Heal Thyself, we love nothing more than to bring a failure and whatever two-star is responsible for that failure in front of us to just humiliate them for 3 hours straight. Any venture capitalist knows that if you're not failing, you're not succeeding, right? So anyway, my point is that, we got to start with the Congress and come to understand that we probably shouldn't take a dozen years to pound on Solyndra, which is still happening, right? It was a failure, but you don't have successes without failures. And change the culture in the Pentagon so that all of a sudden those, lieutenants, captains, and majors who thought they were going to, have a career in armor now better start thinking about very small drones. And I'm really worried that even though the Pentagon is changing faster than it has before, it is not changing at nearly the rate it needs to change to stop Operation Spiderweb or those 20,000 autonomous drones.
There was just a New York Times editorial this week criticizing the $1.5 trillion budget request, that arguing that the war in Iran is showing that despite having a very powerful military, you can't stand up to Iran because it's controlling a strategic choke point. Anything, JC? We were talking backstage a little bit about strategic choke points.
Yeah, when you think again about what's happening in the world right now, right? Like energy is fundamentally tied. Kilowatt hour is directly tied to GDP per capita. How much energy is available ties to the economy, ties to like technology availability, et cetera. When you think about all the data centers, all the technology you want to do, fundamentally the fundamental layer is baseload energy. And today, we have a pretty networked and complicated energy grid or energy reliance from a supply chain perspective. And building fusion essentially allows for like a decentralized, independent, resilient network where you can put theoretically clean energy anytime, anywhere, and anytime really. Whatever you decide to build, you can have your energy source nearby. And I think the more that we see, the threats evolve, critical infrastructure are becoming more and more vulnerable and key targets of attack. And right now, most of our critical infrastructure would benefit from being more resilient as well to several attacks as we've seen right now. These strategic choke points are being used to cripple critical infrastructure, and we building technologies like fusion that enable independent and resilient energy source will be critical to avoid these choke points in the future.
If I can stay with you, before getting ready for this panel, I didn't know a lot about fusion. I don't know if folks in the room know a lot about fusion. Could you give us a little bit of a sense of where fusion technology is between, how close is it to a breakout? And, I'm reading that China is investing much more in fusion technology. You're just talking about the potential of it, but how close is it to being concretely available?
Great, yeah, I'll give a 60 seconds primer in case people are not familiar, but the sun, as you look at it, is an active fusion reactor. What we're trying to do is recreate an artificial sun on Earth in a bottle, which sounds very complicated, and it is, but essentially trying to recreate the same conditions on Earth. There's one now that's been a pursuit over the past 60 years, really, was about more than 50 companies trying to do it. Why now and why this is changing, why we have a commercial company pursuing it as opposed to just a research lab. First, there's been some breakthrough that actually came from the national labs. Lawrence Livermore National Lab in December 2022 demonstrated for the first time that scientific break-even is possible, which means the amount of energy that came into, that it took to create fusion is greater than it came out. At the scientific level, they discovered a lot of stuff. So some people argue how relevant it is. The key point is I see it like the Wright brother moment, where the first flight was a bit demonstrated. It's not a commercial airline. Yes, there's so many problems, but at least the concept was demonstrated. And so now it's a race to essentially optimize the unit economics to get it to be commercially viable, increasing the reliability through repetition rate, and then third, just increasing the efficiency of energy out. So I see it joules, which is the unit for energy, max joules, the dollar per joules and the rep rate, how often can you launch. And when you think about China today, they're building, so the United States hasn't built new facilities in the past 30 years, ever since the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. China has taken the blueprints and is building them. For example, in pulse power, which is the technology, the fusion technology path that we're developing, which also came from the national lab heritage, like Sandia and Los Alamos. China is building 5 facilities, the US is building 0. And so that's not okay, and they're investing national resources with private capital. And the US, we are working closely with Sandia and Los Alamos National Labs and other partners within the United States to make sure that we stay ahead and we don't let China essentially take our plans and our designs and go build them on our behalf. We have to make sure that we get there first.
And I mean, we are living right now in the world where AI is impacting, it's ubiquitous. In what ways is it transforming the capabilities that in what Vantor is able to do?
Yeah, I think it's AI. First off, I got to say something. I thought space was hard. I think it's got to be hard to create the sun. So that's impressive.
It is hard, yeah. Well, we've done it, yeah.
Yeah, I think AI is everything, and I think that if you think about the technological advantage that we do have from the U.S. perspective is our leadership, but we can't lose that. But we apply it to everything, and a lot of people talk about it in so many different fashions, not realizing we use it for everything from employee productivity to actually how we use advanced capabilities and future design principles of breaking physics in space. To actually how we actually do things like, everybody's familiar with large language models. Mm-hmm. The new one is large vision models. Because the fact that we now have to take imagery or motion and we have to be able to apply and learn from it and then not make mistakes. And let me give you a classic example of where this is really important. We're trying to understand what's going on in the earth at all times. And if you're a war fighter, you want to understand where the adversary is, or a tank or a drone or something of that sort. You have to be able to identify that. And you have to make sure you don't make a mistake, because if AI, you teach it the wrong way, it will identify everything wrong. And if you're targeting off of something like that, you can make a very big mistake by applying AI. There's actually the moral discussion of going to where's the human in the loop in discussions in regards to how you actually apply these models. But it's moving rapidly, incredibly fast. We're teaching these models every single day to be able to do, see and identify and do things, faster and differently. Think about analyst decision-making process could be in minutes now versus, hours or days. And I think that's one thing that's, incredibly important for the defense and intel communities that we move forward. So we're applying AI and all of these other things. And then the last one is, people don't really understand how important it is when you're developing capabilities, product. Things that used to take us a year from a code perspective, we're doing in a week. We actually redesigned an entire operating system of something that was foundational to our company that my team told me 6 months ago was going to cost me tens of millions of dollars and take 2.5 years. 2 of our engineers did it in 4 days with cloud. If we don't understand the impact of AI across all facets of our business now and where we're going, it's pretty incredible. But you also understand we need energy, we need compute, and we have to make sure we can maintain that advantage.
It seems to me that underscores, just the how important the competition is, right? Having more powerful AI than China. There's a ripple effect there, but also the idea of guardrails, we've seen in the last week, the Trump administration, the Pentagon announced that it had struck a deal with several AI companies after having a breakdown with Anthropic. And Anthropic says that it was over these issues of guardrails. It was concerned about autonomous AI and mass surveillance. I wonder, Congressman Himes, from where you sit on HPSCI, on the Intel Committee, and in Congress, what kinds of conversations are going on about guardrails on AI, and then maybe on the flip side, what kind of concerns do you have about China's ability to use mass surveillance and empower AI in its military?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I really worry about two things. One is that especially with AI, although also with biosynthesis, and quantum is a more narrow case. Quantum has an obvious application, I mentioned it earlier, breaking encryption that is ugly. Biosynthesis, where, by the way, the scientific consensus is that they may be slightly ahead of us in the research and cutting edge. Really, really worry me. And I think I'll look around at some of my colleagues here. I think the reality is that we are not likely in the Congress to promulgate good regulation in time to stop bad things. I mean, the truth is, look, we're more or less we're over-lawyered, but we're pretty much a pretty representative of the American people. And very few of us have the kind of knowledge of artificial intelligence to really regulate intelligently. So I suspect we're going to respond and be reactive to things that happen. But I also think there's a narrow case. Ironically, you were referring to Anthropic and whatever mess they got into with Pete Hegseth at the DoD. Anthropic may be the one large language model hyperscaler that I actually think has some values. I trust Dario Amodei in a way I don't trust Elon Musk, and I don't necessarily trust Sam Altman. And so, I'm very, very worried about the decisions that will be made, particularly in the context, thank goodness it's Dario Amodei, in the context of mythos. And here's the story there. You've read about, JP Morgan and others getting a look at it. Well, government agencies have as well. And government agencies are telling precisely the story that Dan just said, which is, and I'll stay at a general level here, take our 20 best hackers that we've got inside the United States government. Mythos can do in 2 days what these guys could have done in a year. And so if we don't absorb that and move at the speed, it's generally acknowledged that we have a 6 to 12 month lead on a Mythos-like capability over the Chinese. If the government doesn't radically change itself, both defensively and think about the offensive possibilities offered by Mythos, we're in a lot of trouble. The second thing, if I may just add,
Well, can I say, I mean, is the administration wrong to declare it a supply chain risk and say we can't work with Anthropic if it's on the verge of this tremendous breakthrough?
It's insane. I mean, it's just insane. I still don't know what that conflict was over. I mean, the Pentagon says, well, now wait a minute, Northrop Grumman doesn't get us to tell us where we can fly their planes. Anyway, I don't know what that was, but since they've come up with the most cutting edge, and I think most business people would know that Claude is probably on the cutting edge of, since they're coming up with the cutting edge stuff, don't kick them out the door. Stupid decision. Real quickly, because this is my other huge concern. In virtue of my role on the Intelligence Committee, I get the question once a day, what's the scariest thing out there? Iran and biosynthesis and North Korea and China and everything. I've said for years that it's that we lose our innovative capacity for all the reasons, our innovative lead, for all the reasons that we're talking about here. And I've always believed, I've thought about innovation for decades, and I've always believed there's a dozen things that make you innovative, right? And some of them are minor, good bankruptcy law and caffeine. There's three things that are pillars, right? Three things that are pillars. One is capital markets, and we're actually doing really well. We've got the best early stage capital markets on the planet. The other two are supporting our great research universities. How are we doing on that? You know what university produced the most Nobel laureates in the last 10 years? Harvard University, which is currently having its R&D budget threatened by the administration. And what's the third pillar of innovation? Immigration. Name for me a tech company that wasn't founded or is run by an immigrant, right? And how are we doing on that? So you can hear a little bit of panic in my voice here.
I'm pointing at JC, who's from Lebanon.
You're hearing a little bit panic in my voice here because it feels to me like in the last 15 months, we have been completely undercutting two of the three major pillars of our innovative capacity.
Yeah, JC, did you want to jump in on that? I mean, how are we doing on the talent pipeline and what are you seeing in terms of immigration policy and how it's impacting folks like yourself?
Yeah, well, what I would say is, first, I would not be able to build the company I'm building today if I didn't have the chance to come to America. So I think the American dream is alive, and I wouldn't be here without it. So I think this is the best nation to build. And even if you look historically, the Manhattan Project, the Von Braun Auditorium, and some places. So America has built essentially a lot of its innovation by gathering the best minds from even some of our adversarial countries to bring them to America. And right now, I think we're seeing more drainage with the 1,000 talent program, for example, for the CCP, that's repatriating Chinese people out of a critical position in the United States. But what is the US doing to essentially do what is done best at most critical technological times? And yes, fusion is very hard making the sun, but it's also a technology that we have to sustain. The way we get there is by capital, people, and a maniacal sense of urgency over a long period of time, and building a business throughout that, which is why Fuse is different. But beside is really people, capital, and the sense of urgency, and kind of restoring that sense of urgency and compounding on what actually made America win a lot of those technological races historically.
All right. Well, I think we ran out of time, but we had a great conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. If I could have a round of applause for the panel.